It's that sound, which means it's another week of high school football in the great state of Georgia. I'm your host, Will Cooper, along with my co host, Art Mosley. Art, how are you doing, my friend?
I am doing fantastic. We made it through a hot week last week. We had some very exciting games on Friday night, and we're back again for week 2 of our North Georgia Sports Report podcast, the premier podcast for Cherokee County football and surrounding areas here in the state of Georgia. And I couldn't be more pleased to be back here with you. Got a couple of great interviews lined up. We've got all 6 county teams in action again. We'll talk about the week that was, and then we'll look ahead to the week that is to come. That is week 2.
Very excited, and thank you for being back with us. And thank you all for joining us here again on the North Georgia Sports Report podcast. So, without further ado, Art, let's jump right in, my friend. We got plenty to talk about. The first thing on our list is talking about Cherokee, as we'll go in alphabetical order. We'll kind of review what happened last week for each of these teams before we get into our previews and our coaches' interviews. So, looking back at Cherokee last week, obviously came up a little bit short against River Ridge. Art, that was mostly due to special teams. I think from what I saw, River Ridge had a couple of punt return for touchdown, block return for touchdown, a few different ways to score there. All that being said, they scored on special teams, which is what River Ridge typically does. So that was kind of the deciding factor. If you took out the special teams play, that's a game that Cherokee, obviously they were competitive in any way, but probably comes out with a win. But with that being said, it is a big part of football. Obviously, one thing that I wanted to point out, and this is true with all of our first starters this year. So this includes Sawyer Ray for Cherokee, Hunter Lockerman for River Ridge, and then Alex Penrod over at Creekview. None of them turned the ball over. They were all clean on the sheet, which is something normally that when you have some younger or first-time starting quarterbacks, you see that inexperience come out with some turnovers. Not the case this week, so great job by Sawyer Ray. Ended the game with 135 yards and a touchdown. Really high completion percentage, completing about 88% of his passes, 14 of 16. So very high level of completion percentage, and that was aided a lot by Brandon Hamilton, who was a guy that we had talked about a little bit in the preseason show and even last week. Ran the ball for over 100 yards on 30 carries, had a touchdown in there as well. Sawyer Ray also carried the ball pretty well. He ended up with 60 yards. So we kind of talked to Coach Holley about this in the preseason show, that they were going to be having a new identity with running the ball instead of throwing the ball everywhere. They certainly did that in a big way. I think for Cherokee, the key is to find more consistent production. And obviously, if you can help yourself on special teams, that would be a big difference maker as well.
Yeah, Coop, I agree with your assessment here. Sawyer Ray was pretty good in that ball game, as you mentioned, 135 yards through the air, 60 on the ground. Brandon Hamilton really carrying the load. I believe Jelion Trowers was out and did not play last week, so Hamilton proved that he can really tote the rock there 30 times. That's a lot of carries for a young man. I know they are expecting to get Trowers back at some point this season. We'll see how soon that is. You get a great 1-2 punch there, but overall, I was really impressed with Cherokee not being the moment not being too big. Ray seemed to have a little bit of a connection with guys like Jack Rubin and King Bellin. Friday night, those were a couple of his top receivers, along with Asa West. Those three all combined for 10, to catch 10 balls, 118 yards. So on top of Hamilton maybe catching a couple of passes out of the backfield. So this is a team that probably not looking to push the ball vertically downfield just yet, as Ray grows into that position. But I think you're right, Coop. I thought their backers were flying around. Guys like Simmons, who's we've called both of his older brothers' names several times for the Warriors, but Kason Simmons now looking really good at linebacker. So I was impressed with what I saw from Cherokee, and I'll go back to what you said. I think they, the special teams really, really hurt them. River Ridge getting a punt return on a short punt, and then a mishandled snap or a kick, a block punt that turns into a scoop and score for River Ridge, being the difference. And I also want to give you your props. I think you had River Ridge winning that game by 5 points, and they certainly did. But for the Warriors, a lot to take away from this ball game. You were able to compete against a team that's probably a little bit more experienced at every position. and something to build on. It doesn't get any easier this coming week, and we'll talk about that momentarily, but not a bad outing. No such thing as moral victories, and we'll kind of ask Coach Holley that later on in the program. But, exciting night for the Warriors. I think things could have been much worse. They come out with a first-time starting quarterback, and like you said, if he turns the ball over, 3 or 4 times, this could be different, and we could be singing a different song. But I think there's a lot positives to take away from Cherokee, and we'll look to see how they grow. And we'll talk about their upcoming opponent here, their matchup here momentarily.
Yeah, Case and Simmons, you mentioned him, did a great job. Had a fumble recovery, had a sack, had 2 tackles for loss. I mean, just was all over the field, which they will need from him. They're going to need that kind of production from somebody as reliable as he has been for Cherokee for so long. So I like, again, I kind of echo your sentiment. I like where Cherokee's at. I think they're maybe a little bit better than what we had thought to begin the season, which was something we talked about off air. It's kind of hard to get a gauge. This is the great fallacy of week 1, is that everybody's either going to jump on board or jump off the ship. And we don't know what these teams end up being, right? Because if River Ridge ends up going 9-1, then this loss is not a big deal. Right. If River Ridge ends up going, 0-10 or 1-9, then yeah, okay, I can see that. But either way, you can't jump too far in the ship. But I think the building blocks are there. And I think what we saw from this Cherokee team was a lot of fight. We saw more of that renewed identity that we kind of saw in the River Ridge game last year, where they really came out very physically. And I think as the season kind of progressed, they might have gotten away from that and gotten more towards the finesse side of things when they were trying to pass around so much and knew they had to score a ton. I think their defense stepped up in a big way. So I like what I saw from Cherokee. Obviously, they got a big test coming up against Sequoyah this week, which we'll talk about towards the end of the show when we get into our game previews. But as far as the past week goes, I think it's not any time for any Warrior fans to start, pacing and start thinking, man, here we go again. I think they're in a much different situation than they might have been last year at this point.
Agreed, Coop. Let's move on to talk about our next team in alphabetical order, the Creekview Grizzlies. They rode up I-70 across Highway 20 up to I-75 to Gordon County, just past the Buc-ee's in Calhoun, to face the defending Class 3A champs. And man, Coop, that was a tough way to start out your 2025 season against a defending champ that returns a lot of players when you're not returning a lot of experience, and Creekview comes up on the short end of the stick. 28-3 was the final. Just really not able to get a whole lot going offensively. We did see Carson Lott and Travis Vines almost exclusively in the backfield for the Grizzlies, while Mason Munn was on the defensive end of the ball, defensive side, playing at linebacker. Munn did come in for play a few series a couple of snaps on offense rather. But really, like I said, it was Lott and Vines, and at times they looked really good, Coop. They just couldn't string together plays over and over again. You almost knew this was coming, but the Penrod twins certainly had a great connection when they need to. And I thought that Austin Penrod defensively looked really good. Had a couple of almost touchdown saving tackles, a big 4th down stop on a 4th down and short where they got a turnover on downs. J.D. Russell looked good in the secondary. Hayden Hansen looked good in the secondary, and Hudson Stanley I thought also looked pretty good defensively, making a couple of big stops. Overall, I think there was just a little bit too much speed on that Calhoun sideline, and Penrod was really being harassed when he did throw Calhoun's offensive line. Sager Quinn, Alec Upshaw, those 2 guys are Division I level guys, and they really made it difficult where you thought either the backs or the quarterback might have had a lane. They really closed space quickly, and that was the difference in the ballgame. 28-3, Chiefs did get a field goal by Colt Davis to get on the board, but not enough on offense. And I don't want to say that's what we expected. I don't know what we expected, but I think when you ran up against a team like Calhoun, who's interestingly enough about them, Coop, I know we're talking about Creekview. They're a couple of their best players are sophomores, their quarterback and their starting running back, and they just had a lot more depth at the position, and those guys were all region players last year. So Calhoun's running in 2, 3, 4 different running backs, keeping everybody fresh. And I think that was ultimately the difference is their team speed and their depth over there. And I think Creekview's still trying to build that depth. I think they have a lot of pieces. I don't think you can gauge the rest of the season by this one game, but certainly the Grizzlies have their work cut out for them. They won't see an opponent like they saw last week, this week, and maybe not for another couple weeks, but a game that's great preparation for once you get into region play and potentially once you take maybe a road playoff game. That's a great atmosphere up there in Calhoun. And so a lot to take away from a lot of areas for growth for the Grizzlies, but they'll be better. And I'm sure they'll be better this week for that game.
Yeah, look, I think we kind of go back to what we've said about Creekview for the last few years. The offense has been the issue, right? Now, look, Alex did a really good job with protecting the ball. 7 of 7 for 64 yards. Obviously, not, when you look at the numbers, that's not anything that you write home about. But in terms of taking care of the football, which I think is probably their identity from listening to you guys call the game, is we're going to hand the ball off a whole bunch this year with a few different backs, keep everybody fresh, and we're going to pass the ball when it calls for it, but we're not going to be a pass-heavy team. So that's fine. That's perfectly fine. I agree. Look, you're facing a Calhoun team that is fresh off of a state title in 3A. You're facing a team that has a lot of young depth. You're facing a team that has some guys that are going to play Division I football. Even if they're only sophomores, they're already getting attention from those Power 4 schools. So that the talent disparity is probably there in some ways, as it would be with most teams in North Georgia and Calhoun, but especially on display there. So I think from that standpoint, for me, just trying to find some form of offense that's consistent, right? That's the thing. We know the offensive line's really young, returning only a few pieces from, you've done a really good job of eloquently putting it, how much they've had turnover really over the last 3 years at that offensive line position. And that kind of shows after a while. And I think it's what's affecting Creekview right now. But I think, like we said to start the season, this is a team that week over week you'll see improve. And the team that they are week 1, when they played a team coming off of a state title, will be not the same team that we see come week 5 when they open up, the region schedule. So again, it's overreaction, week, overreaction start of the week. Everybody likes to, run for the hills or run down to, celebrate with everyone, but it's not time to do that. Everything's still fine. And for me, I think that's the key. Obviously, you watched the game in person. You were there calling the game. You guys did a great job with that. So I think you covered it pretty well. The only thing that I would add to it was I was surprised by the discrepancy of carries. How tight the group was. You had Travis Vines with 9, you had Lott with 13, and then you had one Penraw with 9, one Penraw with 4, and you mentioned Mason Munn came in and only had a couple on a drive. But they're keeping guys fresh, which is kind of what we figured, because when you don't have necessarily that stand-up back or a guy like Mason Munn who could be, but you need him at the linebacking position to replace some of what we've seen over the last couple of years with guys like Brent Freeman. It makes sense that you want to rotate in some younger, fresher guys that can keep that production up. Because at the running back position, there's not really a position that gets more punishment than maybe your lineman. So all of that being said, obviously they're going to face North Forsyth this week, a team that will probably be much more their speed in terms of talent and team makeup in general. So I echo your sentiment. Not time to panic. Everybody relax. Everything's fine. Just, keep seeing production. And I think, if they can, I would like to see them throw the ball just a touch more. Maybe get to that 100-yard mark would make me feel a little bit better if they can do that this week.
All right. Those are our thoughts on the Creekview Grizzlies and their game against Calhoun. We'll talk about their upcoming game as they travel to Raider Valley, Coal Mountain to face North Forsyth. Next up, Coop, maybe the game of our game. Well, definitely our game of the week last week when we highlighted it on the podcast. The Etowah Eagles victorious in the Battle of Town Lake, a game that you were keeping us updated on. As I was working the airways with our good friend Dave Garner over at WLJ 101.1 The Pulse. Etowah with a surprising, at least a surprising to us, maybe not as surprising to the folks at Eagle Mountain, but a surprising 38-31 victory over their cross the street rival Woodstock Wolverines. Coop, thoughts on this ball game?
I mean, from the Etowah perspective, it couldn't have gone much better. Look, I mean, kind of what we had been talking about being potentially there was there. Zeke Douglas was electric. I mean, the guy, he completed the passes he needed to, ran the ball for, just over 75 yards, was just doing a really good job of taking care of the football. Again, no turnovers for Etowah here. Walker Hughes was a guy that we thought was really going to step into that running back position. He did, but really as a receiver more than anything. I mean, had a bunch of receiving yards. Him and Zeke Douglas have a really good connection there in terms of the receiving core. So that was good to see. The offensive line did a pretty good job against a Woodstock front that has a lot of talent. Obviously, it was a high-scoring affair. I'm sure if you talk to Coach Vavra, that would be one thing he would want to, focus on was not giving up 31 points. But Woodstock's kind of at the point where they're going to get theirs. I think that's going to be the thing this year with Woodstock is they're not going to, be held to less than 21. So for Etowah, not bad. We mentioned some of the other guys that we saw. Slats was a guy that I thought had a really good production. Obviously had the touchdown catch there. Taking in the game live, guys like Drake Mason, coming up with that big pick six to kind of start the whole thing. Woodstock's in plus territory, and then boom, pick six, and it just kind of developed from there. Woodstock threw some punches at Etowah. They withstood it. I remember thinking going into overtime that I didn't know how they would hold up because that's usually when you see younger teams kind of start to fall off. And Woodstock was more battle tested, but great credit to Etowah for being able to stand up. Obviously, scoring the touchdown there in overtime with Walker Hughes and then coming out and keeping Woodstock off the board. So I liked what I saw from Etowah. I think they're a very exciting team. Again, don't overreact. What does it mean to beat Woodstock? It means a lot for those kids. It means a lot for that coaching staff, and it means a lot for that community. And the community showed out in a big way for Etowah. But I think one thing that you have to keep in mind is that we don't necessarily know where anybody is right now, right? And especially teams don't know what Etowah is going to do because Woodstock didn't have any live game film of what Etowah was going to throw out there. And Sprayberry, who they're going to face this week, is going to have very limited film. Now, they know the coaching staff really well. Obviously, a lot of these coaches coming over from Sprayberry. But in terms of straight, what are the roles that they're going to fill? I don't know. So I guess if you want just kind of a summary of all I'm saying here, it's that the passing game's much better than I thought. The rushing game needs to take a couple steps forward to kind of alleviate some of that pressure. And some of the passing yardage came just based off the way the game was going because it got pretty quick. And again, I thought the defense did a pretty good job overall. So I like where Etowah's at. There's a lot to like about the Eagles this season.
Coop, you mentioned this earlier, but Zeke Douglas not starting his first game on Friday night. He was a starter all year last year. So we talk about the moment not being big for some of these guys. I think that probably played into a lot of Etowah's success, having a seasoned, experienced quarterback, the junior in Douglas, leading his team to victory or helping lead his team to victory. Had to have been a great feeling on Eagle Mountain on Friday night. Now they have to turn their attention. It's got to be short-lived. They got to turn their attention to a big opponent, Sprayberry, as they'll travel to East Cobb to face the Yellow Jackets. We'll talk about that game coming up. But Etowah, again, 38-31 overtime victory. And something that I think we talked about, Coop. Can they be competitive? They prove that, yes, we can be competitive and we can win a football game. And I think, as you mentioned, it speaks volumes for that program, the energy over there. And man, what a great way to go into that Sprayberry game. And I think now they have to think, okay, now we got to buckle our chin straps on again because here comes maybe one of the best teams we'll face all season, not in Class 6A. Coop, let's turn our attention a little bit further down the street from Etowah on the other side of the city of Woodstock, the River Ridge Knights. We talked about their opponent from last week, the Cherokee Warriors, River Ridge, getting a 5-point victory, 26-21. The final over at the Ridge, two special teams scores. We did talk about it. a lot of Micah Pugh and a little bit of Sam Vincent. Really, the difference here in this ball game for the Knights. Coop, your thoughts on River Ridge and their opening week victory over Cherokee?
Yeah, this was a game that I was kind of watching intermittently with Woodstock and Etowah. I thought that River Ridge did a really good job. Obviously, we've known Micah Pugh, really as a freshman. We kind of saw him trot out with Cam Cox, and they've done a great job with him. I mean, he's developed a ton. You can tell the offseason work's been put in. You mentioned it, 165 carries, touchdown in there. If he does that for the rest of the season, they're going to be just fine. Hunter Lockerman looked pretty good. Again, no turnovers for these guys, right? All of these first time starters, no turnovers. So he did a really good job. Completion percentage probably a little bit lower than what the staff would have wanted it to be, but overall they did a really good job with that. And then the big thing being special teams. Again, they got 14 points off the special teams with everything. So I think for where River Ridge is at, it's kind of a weird spot, right? Because if you take out the special teams play, what does that put Cherokee at? But that's the thing about River Ridge is they've been always good at special teams. I remember you and I sitting over at Rome in 2020 and then kicking an onside kick right off a kid's face and picking it up. And it's like, how'd y'all come up with that? But they do. And they always have. That's Coach Collins, has done a great job with that in his coaching staff. So I feel like that was done really well. Overall, kind of the same thing I would say for Woodstock, I would say for River Ridge, where they didn't know what to expect from Cherokee necessarily. This was a team that, Cherokee underwent a lot of changes, and what it all meant for them, nobody really knew. So I guess in that sense, they did a good job fielding that. They obviously, kept them to a reasonable amount of yards. They kept the game very close. It was a shorter game than what we're used to seeing with River Ridge games. Again, they've kind of adapted the same way where they're going to run the ball more, and clearly it's working for them. Defensively, they did a great job. Wyatt McCarty, Matthew Burdett, some of these guys we've talked about, McFarland and Redmond both came up big for them as well. I thought that was a really talented group coming into this season. I thought the defense might have been one that we might have, even overlooked in some ways, but they showed that they were able of doing that. A lot of negative plays they were able to force across the board. Cherokee a lot of the time had to fight behind the sticks. So I like where River Ridge is at. Obviously, coming away with the win's a big deal. They're going to face a Denmark team this week that'll be a much different challenge than what they had last week in Cherokee. But I feel like River Ridge is, again, sitting maybe one we called right, or maybe we got one right in the preseason. I feel like this score did not surprise me. It didn't shock me how they did it. Maybe did. I didn't think they would score that many points on special teams, but the overall consistency that we've seen from that team and them being a consistent, tough customer does not surprise me at all.
You mentioned Burdett, McCarty, the usual suspects on defense for River Ridge, Coop, and then the special teams. We've certainly talked about that. I believe we highlighted that last week, but they came into play big for River Ridge and kind of gave them a pick-me-up. Certainly didn't see Cam Cox last week. When he is available to play, he going on along with Micah Pugh, maybe they don't have to tote the ball for 30-plus times each, but a combined, you keep those two guys fresh. We've seen both of those running backs carry the load for this team. So this could be a very dangerous football team when everybody is healthy and everybody is ready to rock and roll with two backs that can really punish an opposing defensive front. And I think River Ridge is going to be a team to watch out for, not just in the county, but also in region play. Moving along, next up is the Sequoyah Chiefs, Coop, in a game that probably had everyone scratching their head in the first half, down 21-10 going into the locker room. But the Chiefs hunker down and really stymie Denmark in the second half, hold them scoreless, Coop, and come back. You had to use a little bit of trickeration late in the ball game. Coach Jackmine and Coach Teter reaching into the bag of tricks, as some would say, to use a halfback pass for Will Rzecki, who was explosive again. But they come behind, get the win, and they start their season off 1-0. Coop, thoughts on Sequoyah over Denmark?
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things. Their game kicked off just a few minutes earlier than Woodstock and Etowah did, and flipped over, saw it, watching it on my phone. It's like, oh yeah, Will Rejecki 80-yard touchdown. Okay, cool. And you kind of put your phone down. You're like, well, there we go. And then you get to half, and yeah, you're like, wait a minute, they didn't score another touchdown, and you just kind of like, well, what happened to that defense? We were asking what they would look like, and obviously this was a shootout last year. But yeah, I think there were probably a lot of people that were nervous. I know we certainly were kind of sitting there like, oh, what's going on here? But look, Sequoyah is a team that at this point finds a way. The old adage of a win is a win, regardless. That's just 100% true in this case. I feel like they probably got caught off guard. Denmark probably did with the first touchdown run, and then momentum shifted way back towards the Danes. But again, Sequoyah is Sequoyah. They take care of the football. Will Rejecki's going to get his. You talk about just overall yardage. The guy had well over 150 yards. He's kind of earned the nickname for me of like Mr. Touchdown, just the guy, you get to the end of the game and it's like, so how many touchdowns did he actually score? Because he is going to. And as you mentioned, whether by run or by pass, he will do it. So I wouldn't panic. Again, I feel like this is the time of year where it's easy to go, oh my gosh, we didn't score as much as we thought we should. Or our defense really got punched in the mouth in the first half. Yes, and you won the game. Yes, and you beat a team that's in the highest classification in Georgia. Yes, and you beat a team that's been to the playoffs for the last few years. Like, it's okay. It's all right. Obviously there's some games in the out of region schedule that at this point would make you nervous, but there's no reason to be. And one last thought before I hand it to you, I thought that Drew Williams played a really good game. He was kind of a guy that when we talked to Coach Teter a couple of weeks ago, he had told us he was a guy that he felt like was going to have to step up and take that role for Tewo. I thought he did a great job. Led the team in tackles. I think he had 13, well over double digits. So I feel like they're going to be a better group. I think that this was a learning experience for them. They got out of it with a win, which if you're a good team, you will find a way to win, which they do. They've learned how to win and they do it. So nothing to be worried about.
All right, Coop. Good thoughts on Sequoyah. I thought the adage of ugly but effective when it comes to wins certainly played into that, and we'd be remiss. Winning touchdown scored by Colby Martin as he scampers, kind of reverses field. How many times have we seen that over his now 3+ year career at Sequoyah, beating teams with his legs late in the ball game, securing the victory or scoring the go-ahead touchdown, which would eventually secure the victory for the Chiefs. They moved to 1-0 on the season. Kudos to the folks off of Hickory Road as the Sequoyah Chiefs move on. Now they'll travel on the road next week. We'll talk about that game momentarily. Coop, before we move on to Woodstock, just wanted to make mention Coach Teter tying the all-time county wins record and Sequoyah wins record all in one. So that certainly now record being held by Coach Teter and also, by longtime head coach at Sequoyah, all time, along with Coach Sid Maxwell. So those two sitting neck and neck, and Coach Teter, chance to pass him this coming week. We'll talk about that shortly, and we're excited to announce that we'll have Coach Teter on the podcast a little later on. Coop, let's move on to Woodstock, man. They came up on the short end of the stick, got punched in the mouth early, responded, kept battling back, took a lead, lost a lead. Game went to overtime. Couldn't quite get it done, but Woodstock showed, at least offensively, they kind of picked up where they left off last season. They were putting some points on the board.
Yeah, I mean the big thing that we were looking at in this game was the replacement of Isaiah Payton and who would be taking over that role. Trace Washington had a couple of big touchdown runs. One was 60+ yards. Graham Burmeister did his part as well. Had a touchdown run. I mean they scored very effectively. The offensive line did okay. Etowah did a pretty good job getting after him at times by way of blitz more than just a standard 4-man rush. But Burmeister was on the run a lot. I think it's just a game of remember that these guys are still learning, right? We kind of put them on a pedestal at the end of last year and said, okay, Woodstock's now in that group with the River Ridges and the Sequoias and, these teams that are perennial, playoff teams. I don't want to say they aren't. Again, this isn't the this isn't the week to throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's just the point where you kind of have to say, okay, what did we learn from this? I think that when you look at what they did on the field, there's a few mistakes that were made. Obviously, the big one that stands out is Burmeister with the pick six, in plus field, plus territory, driving, and the pick six kind of ends that momentum. And then from there, for Woodstock, it was a dogfight. And it almost felt like in that game that Woodstock was kind of throwing out the game plan, trying to figure out what Etowah was going to do because they didn't know what Etowah was. Right? We knew Zeke Douglas. Obviously we knew Walker Hughes, but what was the coaching staff going to do with that? What was the defense going to look like? And for all intents and purposes, we didn't really know. But to their credit, they handled it, and they took some leads. But you have to give a ton of credit to Etowah. They found a way to fight back. They never laid down. So from the Woodstock perspective, I think this is a game that you can use as massive, massive motivation, right? I think that probably even happened in the locker room of, hey, everybody's been telling y'all that, we're here now, right? Well, here we are, and here's what happens when we're here. And, people are going to come for us, so we got to be ready. So I think for Woodstock, this is not a time to panic. Obviously, it's disappointing losing that rivalry for those kids. I mean, that's kind of the Super Bowl for them in a lot of ways. And it's hard to play at week 1 too, especially against a team that you don't know what to expect. But Woodstock has a distinct advantage of having their next few games being against some teams that are not doing very well or haven't recently and didn't in week 1. So they'll take Woodland Cartersville on this week, who lost to the other Woodland. So I don't want to call it a get-right game. We'll talk about it more. But again, everybody relax. It's okay. No reason to panic. Everything's fine.
Completely agree, Coop. Way too early to hit the panic button. I think we saw some good things, as you mentioned, out of Woodstock. Trace Washington, we talked about running the football, also effective defensively at linebacker. Burmeister also showing off the wheels as well. So a lot of good things to look forward to. We'll get into next week's game. You mentioned, I think, I'll say this right now, and I'll say it again later in the podcast when we talk about Woodstock. You just can't let Etowah beat you twice. And I think that's the thing. And you talked about their opponents. You called it get right. I would say they're facing a team that probably is not as talented as them over the next couple of weeks. Might be the politically correct way to say that.
Yeah.
And again, we'll get into that later on in the podcast, but certainly an opportunity to get better next week for the Woodstock Wolverines. Coop, we've reached kind of the halfway point of the podcast here. We're going to turn now to our previews. We go in alphabetical order, but our game of the week, if you didn't know already, is Cherokee Sequoyah. That game being played at Tommy Baker, season opener for the Cherokee Warriors, their last season opener at their current location against a longtime county rival. We'll get into that at the end. We'll do that segment last. So first up, Coop, we're going to go in alphabetical order. We've got Creekview traveling over to North Forsyth to take on the North Forsyth Raiders, a game they won by one possession a year ago. Coop, what are your thoughts in this game coming in? What we saw from Creekview last season, and what do you expect out of them this week?
Yeah, I mean, North Forsyth is kind of a hard team to nail down. Stylistically, they're very similar to Creekview in a lot of ways. They did beat Wheeler. North Forsyth did 25-21 was the final over there. So probably in different mindsets. I think for Creekview, the coaching staff, their key is going to be to, you probably don't tell your kids like, hey, it was a 3A state champ we just went and played. Like, what did you expect? But, there's a level of a reality there where when you do go play North Forsyth, there's probably some, element of let's figure this out. I think that they should, be able to run the ball a little bit more effectively. I think that they'll, again, like I said in the preview part, I think the key for Creekview is finding offensive production through the air because they had a high percentage. It just wasn't a ton of yards. So finding a way to do it for enough yardage to make teams worry about it, are you capable of taking the head off of a team? That's kind of the question. Because if everybody's playing the run, everybody creeps into the box and you don't have that shot deep, then, can you do it consistently? It doesn't have to be every time, but hit it 30% of the time. That's enough to make people back up. So that's kind of my thoughts on this one. I like Creekview in this one. Again, Creekview is like one of the teams this year that's just kind of hard to know where they're at, and they didn't give us a ton against Calhoun because we didn't expect that they were going to go into Calhoun and beat them. We knew that it was going to be a tough game for them. So where they're at now, I feel like this is going to be a very competitive game. I'd be very shocked if either team wins by more than a possession. I'm going to take Creekview by a field goal here. I think that they're going to be highly motivated. I think that this is going to be a game where they can set their sights on and say, this is when we can really start to lock in. And again, I think they're going to improve week over week. Coach Williams has a habit of doing that with his teams. So I have full confidence in the group over there. I'm going to give them a 3-point win from what I see.
All right, Coop's locked in with the Grizzlies this week. A little bit about North Forsyth. You mentioned they beat Wheeler 25-21. They do return senior running back Deron Perry, 5'8", 185 back. He rushed for over 100 yards last week. Coop 129, scored 2 touchdowns. A physical type running back with some game-breaking speed mixed in there. So the Grizzlies defenders will have their hands defending a run. You mentioned it's a team similar to Creekview. I couldn't agree more. They are trying to break in a first-year starter at quarterback. Are the Raiders? We'll see how effective this team is. Patrick Bork, I believe, is the young man's name for North Forsyth. He had a pretty good ball game. I think he progressed. He's a sophomore, he's a younger player, so don't have a ton of stats for him historically. But again, when you can turn around and hand the ball off to a guy like Perry, who's been there, done that, I think that's something that North Forsyth will lean on. Coach Robert Kraft over there is a guy who's been doing it for a long time, so knows how to get his guys prepared. Better believe they'll be prepared. One name to remember, Creekview fans, if you're heading over to Raider Valley, Adriel Rojas, just a junior. He's a very disruptive defensive lineman. Coop, he's already sports 16 D1 offers. Among those, I believe, include Stanford, Wake Forest. So this is a guy that will more than likely be playing on Saturdays. Rojas 6'4", 220, so not a small man along the defensive front. The good thing this week for the Grizzlies is they won't have 2 or 3 of those guys to block as they did last week. I think this game will come down to who can run the ball better. I think right now North Forsyth has proven they have. Now, you did mention, the level of competition that these guys played last week will play into it. Another road game for Creekview, I think, from what I've seen, I agree. If they can push the ball down the field, they'll have success. If they can run the ball, I do like their chances. I just think that North Forsyth is a little bit more established on the ground right now, so I'm going with the home team by 4 points. So I'm taking North Forsyth by 4.
I don't hate the pick at all, and I'm seeing what CalPreps picks it as because CalPreps can now be used. They got to write it. You do. They got to write it for North Forsyth. So, CalPreps is that neutral point picker. It's a rating system. So I like to use it when I can, but yeah, they got it by about 4. So either way, I think we all agree it's not going to be a blowout one way or the other. And I think that it's going to be highly competitive. So should be a good game for taking in. And if you're a Creekview fan, the drive over to Coal Mountain is not far.
Yeah, depending on where you're coming from on these Cherokee, as long as 32, 33, 34 minutes and as short as, 25, 26, 27. So get on over there and support. It's tight quarters over there, so get there early, be loud and proud, and certainly rooting on the Grizzlies as they take another road trip. Coop, they will be back home the following week, but back-to-back roadies to open the season. Coop, let's talk about the Etowah Eagles, a team that we spoke about earlier in the podcast with the big win last week. Now they've got to strap it on and go face perhaps one of the best teams they'll face this season, and certainly the best secondary they'll face this season, as a couple of standouts in the defensive backfield for the Jackets. Coop, thoughts on Etowah as they enter this matchup as Coach Vavra goes home to his alma mater and certainly to a place where he's been the head coach for the past 7-8 seasons?
Yeah, I mean, Etowah and emotion, the two words go together because you had the emotion of the rivalry game last week, and now you got the emotion of, going back to where Coach Vavra coached for the last few years. And if you don't think that matters to the kids, you've never been in a locker room before. I mean, it matters, and they know what it means to him. And, he might not say it, and that might be something that's kind of one of those quiet things, but that staff and those kids are really going to be pressing in that game. Look, it comes down to the running game. You mentioned how good the secondary is. They've got multiple players with high level power four offers. You don't want to get into a game where you have to pass the ball. You just don't. They're too much of a ball hawking secondary. So establishing the run's going to be important. Sprayberry dominated Alexander last week. 48-6 was the final over there. I think for Etowah again, run the ball effectively, whether it needs to be Zeke Douglas, Walker Hughes, Mike Goins, whoever, and then defensively, do what you did last week. It's enough. Right, you don't have to hold Sprayberry to 21 points. I don't expect you to do that. So do what you did. Get pressure on the quarterback. Now, obviously, their quarterback's a little bit different customer than maybe they've seen so far, but Duckett is a heck of a ball player. And, we've seen him, feels like he's been at Sprayberry for the last 6 years already, because we've seen him run around Cherokee County defenses for a while. He's a tough guy to bring down. Tackling assignments are going to be huge. The secondary is going to have to play pretty well, because I think that Sprayberry is going to return some of these high-level corners around, play him at receiver. So that secondary will be challenged a little bit defensively as well. To me, it comes down to linebacking core for those guys. They had a really good game against Woodstock. They're going to need to do it again. They're going to have to fill some holes and limit what Duckett can do if one of your defensive linemen gets to him. It's a challenging thing. If you want an advantage for Etowah, they know what Sprayberry's got. Coach Vavra was there. They're very aware of what talents they have and what shortcomings these players may potentially have. So Coach Vavra has an inside track that'll help a ton. And I still think there's the element of surprise. Hopefully from an Etowah fan perspective, you're hoping that they look at them beating Woodstock and say, well, yeah, Woodstock, we beat them last year too. Who cares? Kind of yawn and go into it. So when it comes to predictions, I like Sprayberry by about 10 in this one, but I do think Etowah is going to get out to a fast start. I don't know if that means they'll get the lead, but I do think they'll come out super energized and get the start. And maybe they'll prove me wrong like they did last week, but I still think that this is a team that when they get into the fourth quarter, especially against a team like Sprayberry that's going to make them run long distances because they are much more of a spread it out type team, that it could wear Etowah down. So I like Sprayberry right around that 10-point mark.
All right, Coop. I don't disagree with the pick. You mentioned the defensive backs, Jordan Edmonds, Alabama commit, Keelan Jones, a Georgia commit at safety. Just a very impressive secondary, and certainly Duckett. I think that's the big key. I think we've seen teams get close to tackling him. We've seen him, the escapability is Lamar Jackson-esque, in his prime, Michael Vick-esque, and before your time and my time, Fran Tarkenton-esque. I mean, just a guy that extends plays, and not always to run downfield, but extends plays to throw the ball down the field to find open receivers. Just a different level of opponent this week. Etowah, you mentioned it, and I agree. Can they run the football? Can they protect the football? Those are two things that will keep this game from getting out of hand early. I do agree. I think they'll be in this football game, but I think too much team speed by Duckett, too much talent from those defensive backs, as you mentioned, that flip over on each side. And I happen to like Sprayberry. I like him by a couple of touchdowns. This game being played at historic Jim Frazier Stadium. So I think that at least the Eagles going away, it's an emotional game. Can they come back down from that emotional high and get back to business? I do think they will, but I think it's also an emotional game on the other side. There's a lot of those Sprayberry players that played for Coach Vavra last season, and including those ones that we mentioned. So a lot at stakes on the periphery, but I think when they put the ball down and get ready to play, I think ultimately Sprayberry's just got a talent advantage right now, and I think that's the difference. I like the Jackets by 14.
Agreed. Yeah, I don't think your pick's far off at all. And one thing one comparison that I kind of want to make, because he's as infuriating to tackle as this guy is Johnny Manziel when he was at Texas A&M.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, anybody that was a fan of the SEC remembers what it was like watching, and me being an Alabama fan, remembers what it was like watching him run around, and you're like, oh, we got him. And then never works. So they'll have a good plan for him, though. Again, I do have confidence that the coaching staff will have them in position. I do think it comes down to a level of how many 4 and 5-star guys do you got in the secondary, and can they make you one-dimensional?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Coop, enough about Etowah Sprayberry. Let's move on to River Ridge. They will travel to Denmark to face the Danes. We talked about the Danes a little bit, a team that fell to Sequoyah up early. River Ridge, 25-21 winners, as we mentioned earlier, over Cherokee. They go on the road. First road test of the season. Thoughts on the Knights as they take on the Danes, a team who's probably smarting from that loss, thinking what could have been.
Well, this is going to be a really good measuring stick for River Ridge. Obviously, Denmark was super competitive against Sequoyah, which I think for Cherokee County fans is the standard, even in terms of the region, maybe the standard this year, depending on what Sprayberry is. But Denmark, now preface this. You don't ever want to take 1 week's result and apply it to the next week's result. So I always have to caution people on that when I say this. What I mean is that in terms of what you see on the field, as in, talent, what do they defend well? What did Sequoyah do well? What didn't Sequoyah do well? What do where do you compare against that? You can understand a little bit of that. So I think that's a measuring stick game for River Ridge. Obviously, beating Cherokee was a big deal for them. Again, did it in an unconventional way. Denmark will have looked at the tape and know that they need some extra protection on punts. I feel like they'll learn that lesson pretty quickly. So, how does it go? Is it Micah Pugh again, 150 plus yards with a couple of touchdowns? Is it Hunter Lockerman takes that extra step and kind of moves into that more of a passer role? Does the game get high scoring? I kind of get the sense that this game might be more high scoring than people think. I think most people probably have it pegged around the 20s. I wouldn't be surprised if we see it touch the 30s from both teams. So in that sense, I think that River Ridge, it's almost impossible to predict. Denmark's at home. I'm going to give Denmark the edge by a couple points, just because, like, when you look at them on paper and kind of comparing their body of work, they're really close. So hopefully River Ridge proves me wrong in that one, but that would be my big question. And then obviously the defense, right? We saw Sequoiah's defense step up in a big way in the second half last week. Hopefully River Ridge can get out to a faster start defensively, and they're able to limit what the Danes can do. And, guys like, again, we've mentioned Wyatt McCarty, Burdett, a lot of these guys kind of over and over again, but hopefully they can lead that group again, because this is a game last year that River Ridge won and, kind of set them up on the right path.
Those are all valid points. You talked about in your assessment about not taking last week's opponent in that game against Sequoyah and really kind of using that as a barometer for what to expect this week. And we certainly saw that same thing last year. We thought Sequoyah was probably the class of the county. They struggle with Denmark. River Ridge goes, Denmark comes into River Ridge, and then River Ridge really does not struggle with Denmark, and beats them handily. So certainly you cannot be looking at that kind of, make that kind of comparison, at least this early in the season. Denmark is a team that will certainly test the secondary of River Ridge. They had a couple of long pass plays. One ended up in a touchdown, the other one not. But they showed their potential to really push the ball down the field vertically against Sequoyah last week. That's going to be something I think Coach Collins will have Coach Collins' attention. Guys like Burdett, McCarty will certainly be tasked with getting some pressure on a young quarterback who was making his first start last week, Coop, a guy like Evan Jones. And, again, he was able to make some big plays. Guys like Cam Jennings, Michael Palmieri. And Cam Jennings, a guy that will probably be playing on Saturdays on the defensive side of the ball over there for Denmark. Certainly a target that River Ridge will have to key in on. One name we didn't talk a ton about for Denmark is their running back, Noah Laban. Remains to be seen how much playing time he'll get this week against River Ridge, but I think this is a Denmark team that probably got a lot of confidence last week after getting punched in the mouth early and then coming back. I think they're probably thinking this is a game that what could have been. Meanwhile, you talked about River Ridge, their special teams really saving the day, and certainly Micah Pugh, a combination of Micah Pugh and special teams saving the day, being able to score non-offensive touchdowns, I think was a huge factor, and I think that will be something to look for in this week. I think this game is close. I think my gut tells me that Noah Laban might be the difference, but just the playmakers I think that Denmark has in the secondary might be too much for River Ridge. I do like Denmark. I'm going with you on this one, but I think it's maybe the spread's a little bit bigger, Coop, not that much. I've got Denmark by 4 points here, maybe something like 24-20, 28-24. I don't think this is going to be I don't think it's going to be a 45-41 ball game.
Yeah, I have my sweet spot in the 30s. Like I mentioned earlier, I agree. I don't see it being that high scoring just because it's River Ridge. I don't think it's going to let it. I kind of think they're going to run the ball and keep, some of that kind of game control. I mean, we didn't really talk about it much, but the Cherokee River Ridge game kind of felt like a Sequoyah game of old, right? I mean, it was, they got delayed by 30 minutes because of the weather, and then they still finished, very shortly after the rest of the other teams. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think, 30s is probably a cap. I do think it's probably a little higher scoring than people think, but not by much. And yeah, I echo your sentiment. Well put, sir.
All right, Coop, we're going to move on. We're going to go to our last game before we get to our feature game, and that's a Woodstock Wolverines. They'll be back in the Wolverine Den to host the Woodland of Cartersville Wildcats. If I have that right, Coop, Woodland Cartersville, like you mentioned earlier, fell to Woodland Stockbridge last week. Really had a lot of trouble getting anything going, turned the ball over a few times. For Woodstock, though, they've got to kind of bounce back. What are your thoughts on this one here in Town Lake?
I think this is one that Woodstock has to get back to who they are. I think, I hate it for Woodland Cartersville because you're going to get a really, really mad team. You mentioned it earlier. You can't let Etowah Beach twice, so I don't think they will. But you really need to be careful with these next couple of games with Woodland, and then looking, even further ahead against North Springs. Teams that we as pundits are kind of sitting here saying, that they should handle this. They're more talented. You got to wonder how much of that went into the game last week, right? So they got to be careful. They got to come out and be strong, and they got to be aggressive. I mean, that's the thing is I want to see them be aggressive. Etowah matched them in aggression in that game. Smart aggression too. There were some penalties last week that happened in rivalry games, especially the Battle of Town Lake. I've been on the sideline for some of those games, and some things you don't repeat when you go home and all of that. But yeah, look, this is a team that in Woodland is an opportunity for Woodstock to right the ship. I think they'll rally around the coaching staff. I think they will do a good job. I look for Graham Burmeister to have a big game. For me, I kind of have seen enough from the running game. I mean, you got Trace Washington, you got some other backs that you're kind of rotating in there. I feel like that's a pretty solidified spot, but making sure that passing game comes together, because there were some drop passes in last Friday's game that really affected them later in the game. So I think finding a way to get them that early opportunity to get the passing game right, and then defensively, let's get after it a little bit. Let's be aggressive and get after the quarterback and put some pressure, because there were some times for Etowah where they had some time in the pocket. Now, it wasn't consistent. Woodstock did have, times where they could get to Douglas. He just was able to roll out of it for the most part. So that's what I want to see from Woodstock. From a predictive score, I'm going to give you a big crooked number. I'm going to give Woodstock a win here by about 35. Just in terms of the talent disparity. This was a game last year that Woodstock kind of rolled. I don't see that being much different. I don't think they're any less talented than they were last year. I think they're more talented this year than they were last year. I just think that they have to find their footing in that. And I think this is an opportunity for Woodstock to do just that.
All right, Coop calling for a get-right game against Woodland Cartersville. As we mentioned, the Wildcats fell to Woodland Stockbridge, the Wolfpack of Woodland Stockbridge last week. Their quarterback, Sammy Ray, he'll get his second start. He did have a touchdown pass in the loss last week. But I think turnovers were a bugaboo. We didn't see a whole lot from their running back, Solomon James, who does have some game-breaking speed, and they do return one of their top receivers from a year ago, Corbin Jarrett. All-region selection will be certainly players to watch out for. I just don't know if there are enough of those guys, Coop. And as you talked about, I think Woodstock Woodland is on the short end of the stick when it comes to talent, position by position here this week. Just facing a team that's in a higher classification and probably a little bit strong, a little bit faster, a little bit more skilled overall team in Woodstock. I'm not going to go as big of a number as you are here. I've got to hedge my bets here a little bit, but I do like the Wolverines by right around three scores, 19 points. I like Woodstock to bounce back. I do think they have to guard against the hangover of Etowah, and I said it earlier. You reinforce this. I think it's going to be a slow start for the Wolverines. I'd like to see them get out to a fast start and say, hey, this loss doesn't bother us. We're just here to kick some butt and take names. But we shall see. I do think the Wolverines will be victorious. And as you mentioned, they've got a similar game like this the following week as they'll play North Springs. But before we get to next week, before we talk about the results from anything else, we've got our Cherokee County Game of the Week for the North Georgia Sports Network here on the North Georgia Sports Report. It is the Cherokee Warriors facing the Sequoyah Chiefs. Cherokee will be the home team, Coop. I tell you what, I think before we even get into this ball game, before we give our analysis, I believe we have Coach Adam Holley on the line joining us for the Cherokee Warriors. Let's go ahead and talk to him before we talk about them. How about it?
And joining us now on the North Georgia Sports Report podcast, the head coach for the Cherokee Warriors, Coach Adam Holley. Coach, thank you for being back with us.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, Coach. Always look forward to get to talk to you. And, especially as we get in the beginning of the season, you guys kind of doing a couple rivalry games. Not that River Ridge is a huge rival, but Sequoyah obviously is. But before we get into the game this week, I want to kind of take a look back at last week and ask you how you felt like your group did. Obviously looked a lot different, which you told us in the preseason show. You guys would be running the football a lot more. We saw that firsthand with guys like Brandon Hamilton. Tell us what you saw from the sideline and what you've seen in the early parts of the week getting ready for Sequoyah.
Yes, sir. Well, obviously we came up short, and there were a lot of lessons learned last week, and I knew it. We all knew it that our youth and inexperience at a lot of positions was going to show its head a lot of times early this season. So we knew that. Now, we don't want to make excuses. We always want to find a way to win the game. And we came up short of that, so we missed our goal. But I'll say this, kind of looking back at the film and even how I felt really that night, I was proud of the team in a lot of different ways. I thought we found an identity offensively. I think we knew what we had in Brandon and some of our guys that returned from last season and Jack Rubin. But, I thought Sawyer played a really good game at quarterback. And our young guys are getting better. I mean, I just think about where we're at compared to where we were at in May in the spring game, and I think we've taken some great strides in the right direction. But obviously, we want to see it show up on the scoreboard, and that's always the goal. But we know we got some things to clean up, and that's also I got to give the credit to Coach Collins and his staff and what they do at River Ridge. They're a really well coached team, so. If you make mistakes, especially in special teams, they're probably going to capitalize on it. And when you look back and we gave them 14 points on punt alone, it's going to be hard to beat a team like River Ridge when they're so well coached. So there's a lot of things to learn from, a lot of things we got to get fixed and get corrected moving forward. But, that the youth and the inexperience we have, I've already seen so many good strides forward with those guys in the right direction. So I'm excited to keep this thing going.
Coach, you talked about your young quarterback, Sawyer Ray. His completion percentage was extremely impressive for a young man making his first start on Friday night. What has been the key to his success, or what was the key to his success in that ball game? Is this something where you're opening up the playbook? Does he have full access, or is it just as much as he can handle at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's as much as he can handle, but we have great confidence in him and what he can do. I think, to be honest, we all weren't sure, how much he'd be able to handle in a Friday night in varsity competition. But he's extremely skilled. He's mature beyond his years, so there were some things that I knew that Sawyer had that a lot of sophomore quarterbacks probably couldn't handle at the 6A level, but. It was just obvious once the game got going and he got in a rhythm that he was in it and he was locked in. So he did. I think he was 14 of 16 Friday night and played a really good game. And then unfortunately, late in the third quarter, got a concussion. So that's why he did not play in the fourth quarter of last week's game. But yeah, really excited for him and just, seeing the strides that he's taken at the quarterback position. You can tell just the respect and that he already had in the locker room is only growing day by day.
Yeah, and Coach, as we kind of turn our attention to this week, obviously facing Sequoyah, a team that has done so well for the last few years in terms of what they've done in county, but also in the region and their playoff potential. Want to ask what the preparation has been like, and what kind of challenges does Sequoyah present for your group as you guys get ready for week 2?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, this is a really, really good football team with a lot of their best players back from last year. And so they got a lot of experience, a senior-heavy team with a lot of their playmakers back. So our hands are full. We know that. And it's probably going to require our best. And we've already communicated that to our team that, look, if you want to have a shot to beat these guys, offensively, we've got to execute at a high level. We can't turn the ball over. Defensively is going to have to execute at a high level, and they're probably going to need to force a turnover or two. And then, and we've already addressed it, that the special teams mistakes that we made last week, making those again and with any opponent that will play the rest of the year is going to be, really difficult to win when you make those mistakes. So we know the challenges ahead of us, and we got our hands full. But I tell you what, I'm excited. I know our team is excited for the challenge. I think it's going to be an incredible atmosphere at Tommy Baker Friday night. But I'm confident in our guys. They've had a good week of preparation so far, and we're confident. We can fix these mistakes that we've made and put our best foot forward. I think we can make it a dang good ball game and come away with the win.
Coach, this was a ball game that you guys were in down to the wire last season. I believe 7-point loss, and I think we talked about in the preseason show how many one possession ball games you guys were in last season. Another one this week, and again, you mentioned an experienced team. If we can turn our attention away from just the field, what kind of special activities is there? Anything special planned this week for the last? I don't want to say last home game at first home game at Tommy Baker. I'm not quite sure if you guys are going to take that name over to the new high school, but certainly the last home game for historic Tommy Baker or traditional Tommy Baker. Is there anything special going on at Cherokee this week that you get out to the community?
Yes, sir. Well, it's really cool, and I'll give the credit to our administration. They've gotten a lot of this organized, but each home game, we've invited and reached out to the different decades that graduated at Cherokee throughout all the years since it opened in the 50s. So in our scrimmage against Creekview, it was all the 50s and 60s graduates. And then this week, it's everybody who graduated from Cherokee in the 70s. They're invited back, and they're going to get to the game early and take tours of the school for that, one last stroll down the hallways before we move out, and really have a neat tailgate experience for them where they can kind of see some people that they probably hadn't seen in years or decades. So that's going to be really neat and a good experience. And then we have youth night, which, we're talking hundreds of elementary age kids will be there in their jerseys. So it's going to be an electric atmosphere. And then obviously with it just being the rivalry and Sequoyah being so good, they're going to bring a big crowd. So it's going to be a lot of fun Friday night. And that's one thing we've already told the players. And these seniors, they got to enjoy it because it's memories like this that they're never going to get back. So soak it up every day, enjoy it. Don't take a day for granted. But I'm fired up to see what this place will look like on Friday night.
Should be an absolute electric atmosphere, one of the oldest rivalries in the county. I'm excited. I get a chance to be on campus for that one, Will. I'll be able to take that in. And, Coach, I'm looking forward to watching your team compete. We certainly do wish you the best of luck on Friday night. And as always, we thank you for taking time out of your day to talk to us on the North Georgia Sports Network.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, so a special thank you to Coach Holley for being back with us. Sounds like from what his perspective is of their game last week, and one thing that I've noticed from last year to this year is that even talking about this week, he feels like he's got the group right. He feels like he's got the right core there. So hopefully they can make some things work. Obviously, injury questions come up with Sawyer Ray. Concussion protocols are different across different levels, so we don't know if he'll be available to go. Obviously, they have a really talented backup in Zach Parker, who we didn't talk a ton about. He transferred pretty late in the summer to Cherokee from Rome. He is the number one rated quarterback in the state in terms of freshman class. So that's the 2029 class, I believe. And already has some offers from some Division One schools, FBS schools. I think you feel pretty comfortable about giving him the ball if you need to, especially if he knows, the whole week of preparation that he's going to be taking over the reins for that week. So there's a lot to like about Cherokee coming into this game. Is there anything that Coach Holley said that stood out to you?
I think his impression, I'll go back, and we mentioned this before. I think his impressions of Sawyer Ray were great. He said, we just can't make some of these mistakes we did last week in special teams against a good team, and it's going to be imperative that they button those up against another good team that they're facing this week. I'm excited to see the Warriors really get after it. I think they've got a couple of what could be the best tackles, and I know I'd say that, and we'll talk to Coach Teter, and he'll have something to say about that. But a couple of the best tackles in the county. I think his optimism, Coach Holley's optimism, is what stood out to me. And again, he's like, you know what? We didn't finish the drill. These are things that we've got to get better at. But I like how my team competed and how they played for 4 quarters. And I think that's what the first step, right? You got to be able to compete. And then the second step is fine tuning the small adjustments, the little things that really can flip a game, and especially a big game like this. You want to talk about a chance. They had a chance to defensively. I thought they played well. Giving up 2 special teams touchdowns, and I think they'll have the same opportunity or similar opportunities if they can take care of the football in the special teams. I think they can hang around this game. And like you said, I'm interested to see which quarterback takes snaps this week. Coach Holley did mention the injury, but certainly whoever is taking snaps will be turning around and handing the ball off to Brandon Hamilton, and that's got to be a security blanket. You've got a couple of developing receivers. Coach mentioned Jack Rubin, one in particular that stood out from last week, and I know I mentioned King Beelan as well. Just a lot of potential in this ball club, and I'm excited to see what they've got going on. And again, we do appreciate Coach Holley joining us. This could be a team that we look back and we're like, wow, we didn't see this coming, but not also maybe, yeah, we should have seen it coming because it's a very talented ball club.
Yeah, absolutely right. And Sequoyah presents a lot of the same challenges that River Ridge did to them last week. It's kind of funny that River Ridge and Sequoyah flip their opponents because you get a pretty good look at what those teams do with different styles of ball. One thing I will say is that, Cherokee should have some pretty good experience defending the run
Right.
after these next 2 games. Obviously, Sequoyah is a little bit more efficient passing the ball than what Cherokee's seen in a while. Arguably, since the region schedule ended last year against North Cobb, would probably be a team that was pretty comparable in terms of passing efficiency. So, with all of that being said, I feel like that from a Cherokee standpoint, this is a game where you're going to have to rely on these guys like Case and Simmons. And, you mentioned the tackles and Dorian Stewart, Nation Farmer. They're going to have a great game, and they're going to have to clear some big lanes for Brandon Hamilton. And if it is Zach Parker, you're going to need to give him the opportunity to settle in a little bit kind of like it was for Sawyer Ray last week, right? Sawyer got it done, credit to him, very mature in handling the pocket. And again, no turnovers. So if it is Sawyer, that's great. He can kind of settle into that role. But if it is Zach Parker, then, they're going to need a little bit more of that good work up front as well. So there's a lot of moving parts in this game, maybe more than there have been since, 2021, 2022, I would say, where you're kind of in this game. It's like, man, I don't really know what to expect on Friday.
Yeah, Coop, I'm very curious and interested, and I'm excited to have an opportunity to be out there. For especially for the Cherokee Warriors, how do they bounce back against a game where they were so close? And I know we talked about Woodstock not letting Etowah beat them twice. I don't think that's the same kind of mantra here in this game, but the Warriors really have to do a good job of putting that behind them and then looking forward and not thinking about what could have been, and no lull and no hangover. They can't afford to get off to a slow start against a team like the Sequoyah Chiefs. Coop, speaking of the Sequoyah Chiefs, I think it's time we turn our attention to the visitors of Sequoyah from Hickory Flat. Special guest Coach James Teter, I believe, is joining us. And I think, Coop, he has a friend with him, one of our good friends. And we're certainly looking forward to this interview. And let's go to him right now.
And thank you for joining us on the North Georgia Sports Report podcast. And joining us now is the head coach for the Sequoyah Chiefs, Coach Teter, and the defensive coordinator, Coach Budde. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Yep, thank you.
Absolutely. Guys, obviously want to take a look back at last week before we jump into this week when you guys will face Cherokee over at Tommy Baker Field. Looking back at last week against Denmark, it was a game of ups and downs. Obviously, Denmark got out to a fast start and then didn't have much going towards the end of the game. You guys were able to come back there. Coach Teter, from your perspective, what was your take on the team coming out of the offseason work into that first week, and how do you feel like your team performed that week and kind of leading into this week?
I was a lot happier with the end results than the beginning. I mean, it's kind of what we talked to the team about on Monday. Felt like it was a group that had sat around all summer and kind of had people patting them on the back and telling them how good they were. And we come out and played like that. And then when Will broke that 80-yard run, it just added to that. And it took them jumping on top of us and kind of to wake us up a little bit. But I thought overall at the end of it, it was ugly, but we'll take it a win. I thought, and I told Brent this too, I thought his defense grew up as the game went along. I thought they got a lot better. Offensively, I just didn't think we played pretty much to what our standards are.
Coach Teter, last season we saw your team a few times, and what we thought we maybe an appropriate nickname a couple of times, where the Cardiac Chiefs kind of fall asleep in the first half and then come back from behind and make a big stand. Defense buckles up. Coach, we know and we'd be remiss if we didn't first congratulate you on the tying the county and Sequoyah all-time win mark last week. Your players certainly didn't make it easy on you. Not quite sure as guys like you and I get a little bit older, how many of those close games you take. But is there something to that? Is there something to those halftime adjustments? And we'll ask Coach Budde that momentarily. But just want to talk to you, like how. That's one thing we've noticed. It just seems like you guys are dialed in at halftime. What goes into that for you all?
I think our coaches do a great job of making adjustments. I think they do a great job of seeing what they feel the other team's doing to and what we have to do to change to make some differences. And I think it's just our kids in general, our motto, or what we've leaned on for the last 4 years has been hold the rope. Don't let anything be too much for you. Don't let anything get too far away. Just hold on and we'll find a way. And they kind of showed that again the other day.
Coach, you guys give up a few touchdowns in the first half and then really stiffen up in the second. What was the difference for your team, especially that your secondary and your pass rush?
Yeah, I think it was blown coverages for us. The first big explosive play of the game, they motion out of the backfield and we don't adjust in the secondary, and they found the guy. And then later on, it was just a young corner playing a little too aggressive, and the guy runs right by him, and that was an easy throw and completion. So that led to 14 really of their 21. But so the adjustment was just, hey, do your job. Like, let's be disciplined. Let's make our checks and do what we're supposed to do. Once we did that, we settled in, and I was, like Coach Teter said, I was proud of how they grew as the game went along for a young group.
Yeah, and Coach Budde, kind of tagging on the back of that, as the season started and we kind of had some players that we were circling, talking to Coach Teter, he'd mentioned guys like Drew Williams having to take over some of those roles, Matthew Matt's taken over some bigger roles since guys like Tewo and Ian Mariah graduated. What have you seen from that group so far, and how have they kind of responded to that challenge? Obviously, Drew led the team in tackles last week, but what is your take of that from the defensive side?
Yeah, I mean, I think those two guys have done a great job with Benji Smith, being a 3-year starter now out at corner, and we bring over Brooks Darling, to help us in the secondary when we need it. We picked up a kid in the offseason, Asa Going, strong safety. He's still trying to adjust to our defense, but we really think he's going to be a good player. And along inside with Carson Berry returning in the secondary, and Michael Fountain as well, just solidifying that inside linebacker spot. So, we've been excited about, we feel like we have a good defense. We just got to gel a little sooner, I think, and not blow our coverages.
Coach Teter, we knew coming in that Will Rajecki was a big name. We knew about Brooks Darling. We knew about Kmart at quarterback. Is there a group or a player that really surprised you on Friday night that you thought, wow, we really have this guy looked really good for us, or this group looked really good for us?
I mean, it's probably a lot of the same guys you guys talk about, but I thought our tackles played really well. I thought for the most part, our line played well. I mean, there's times where, we stalled drives, but it really was nothing to do with the line. It was some penalties and stuff here and there. But for the most part, I was really pleased with our line, which is, offensively probably our backbone right now anyway. And then Waller, I thought, played really well. He doesn't get probably as much attention because you got the two big tackles, but what he did was really good. And then Charlie Miller's new in his first time starting, and I thought he handled things as good as you could for a first-time starter.
And gentlemen, as we kind of take a look at this week, when you head over to Tommy Baker to face Cherokee, Coach Teter, we'll start with you, and then Coach Budde give us kind of the defensive look. But what kind of challenges does this group, do they present for your team? And what have you seen on film from Cherokee that you're kind of trying to prepare for this week?
One will probably be the same thing Brent will say, but they're very athletic in the secondary. They're at two linebackers that really come downhill. They're pretty physical. So we'll have our work cut out for us. And again, it just comes down to not worrying about it, I guess, them as much as just, will we go out and do what we're supposed to do and take care of business like we normally should do.
And then Coach Budde, same question for you in terms of offensively, what problems does Cherokee present for your defense?
I think they're big up front, like space eaters up front, and then they have two good running backs right behind it with a capable running quarterback. They showed, obviously, in the River Ridge game about not being afraid to run the quarterback, and he ran the ball really well. So when you add a running quarterback into all that, and they spread you out a little bit, that can open up some seams that we got to make sure that we fit in and get the ball forced to the right players.
Coach Teter, again, we have an opportunity to make a little history. I know that's probably not high on your radar over winning a football game, first and foremost, winning a football game. But has Coach Budde, Coach Jackmine given you any guff about this week, or are they going to have a big celebration for you? Throw a ticker tape parade off of Hickory Road on. I don't want to be presumptuous, but what goes into that? Is that in the back of your head, or you're just trying to win a football game on Friday night?
Just trying to win a game. I don't really worry about those things. It's not about me. It's about those kids.
Well said, and we wouldn't expect anything less. Gentlemen, we do appreciate you all joining us. It should be a fantastic atmosphere over at Tommy Baker Field. The last time you guys will be playing at that particular stadium, both of you guys have coached there as coaches. Is there a fond memory you have of Tommy Baker Field over there, being a visitor going over there? Coach Teter, Coach Budde?
Probably say 3 years ago when we took a young freshman quarterback in and found a way to beat a team that nobody expected us to even have a chance of winning.
I would agree with that one. And then I think anytime you're over there and that tight environment, it's exciting just having the fans right there on you. And I'm thankful that I'm in the press box nowadays, so I don't have to be in those tight sidelines.
Well, it should be hot in that press box this week, Coach Budde. So maybe you'd want to be on the sidelines with the rest of the staff. But in any event, should be an exciting atmosphere. One of the oldest rivalries in the county, and from two of the more historically successful programs in the county. We're looking forward to seeing that, catching that ball game, calling that ball game, and we look forward to seeing you guys out there at Tommy Baker. And as always, we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So again, a thank you to Coach Teter and Coach Budde. We always enjoy having the coordinators on when we can. If there's ever a coordinator that you want on the show, tell your coach, bring them on, because we always like getting that in depth. And I feel like we can go a little bit more into the weeds on it a little bit. So we appreciate both those guys for being with us. So Art, that kind of brings us to the prediction portion of this. Sequoyah. From my standpoint, do what you do. Right. I mean, that's kind of the message that we've had. There's not a ton of critiques you can make. Obviously, slow starts, are not fun. So hopefully they can get out to a faster start. Well, hopefully they can maintain a fast start. I mean, they did start with a 80-yard touchdown run, but hopefully that can maintain for Chiefs fans. And for Cherokee, the key is to survive the punches. Ask Denmark. Sequoyah is going to score. So is Cherokee capable of scoring 28? 31, and are you capable of holding Sequoyah to whatever number you're able to put up? Right. I mean, that's kind of the big question for me is, I don't think this game's a shootout. I also don't see it being low scoring. I think somewhere in the mid 20s is probably where it'll end up. Again, this might be a game that's, kicks off at 7:30 and you're out of there by 9:30 because both these teams, Sequoyah a little bit less than Cherokee, which would have been crazy to say last year, but Cherokee much more of a run heavy team. Sequoyah much more of kind of that balanced offense now. So if you want my overall pick, I'm going to take Sequoyah. Again, this game's at Tommy Baker Field. There should be a lot of emotion. I'll take Sequoyah by, about 10 in this one.
Sequoyah by 10. Coop, a lot of kind of storylines in this ball game. A couple in particular. Again, we talked about it. The last home opener at the current iteration of Tommy Baker Field. The opportunity for Coach Teter to become the all-time winningest head coach in Cherokee County history and Sequoyah history, all in the same. I think that those storylines kind of add to the flavor of this ball game. Not to mention these two teams entering. This will be the 30th meeting all time in this ball game. Sequoyah leading 17-12, so a lot of familiarity. When these two schools opened up, when Sequoyah opened up, they did draw a lot away from Cherokee High School, so a lot of deep family ties run in this ball game. It will come down, in my opinion, to who can run the ball more effectively. I think we're looking at a Sequoyah team who, while the run is their bread and butter, their pass game is a little more refined right now, and a lot of that has to do with the experience at quarterback. In this one, you're talking about bringing in, whether it's a sophomore or a freshman, an underclassman with limited experience into a ball game with an experienced defense. Now, I will say we saw that same thing happen about 3.5-4 years ago when even Coach Teter mentioned it, when he brought a freshman quarterback in and shocked everybody, including you and me and the rest of the broadcast booth as we watched a budding star in Colby Martin born. So could the role be reversed here? Could it be a Sawyer Ray? Could it be a Zach Parker coming in to step up and really upsetting the apple cart here in Cherokee County in terms of the power ranking and a new young quarterback taking the reins here? We'll see. I think conventional wisdom tells me that the experience is on that Sequoyah sideline, and I think that will be the difference. I think this game is probably a little bit closer than others think. Cherokee's going to play with a lot of pride, a lot of passion, and they'll be in this ball game late. But I do like the Sequoyah Chiefs by 9.
Well, there you go. We're right in step on that one. It's always dangerous when we're in step on something.
I tell you what, that means one, we're probably drinking the same Kool-Aid here, Coop, but either we know what we're talking about or we're both way off. And I like to think we know what we're talking about, but time will tell. Time will certainly tell.
Time will tell in a big way. So excited to have that. Again, we'll do same coverage we did last week, live tweeting it and then obviously updating the website with kind of a write up at the end. Art, you're going to be there live with the radio station broadcasting that one on 101.1, the Pulse over there. So you guys did a great job. So if you haven't listened to them, make sure you tune in on there. You can get it online on the app or through your terrestrial radio. That's a lot of fun, but enjoyed listening to you and Dave, and you guys did a great job. So, Art, that brings us to our power rankings, which we have contested greatly over the last few days between you and I and Dave Garner. How would you like to do this? Because our bottom teams look mostly the same. It's just a little bit of a gap once we get to the middle.
Look, we can play a little volleyball here. And, Dave Garner, I'm going to call him out. I don't know if he's going to listen or not, but not man enough to show up and defend his rankings this week, Coop.
Can't do it.
He can't do it. So we'll call him out and see next week if we can get him on to be, to stand up behind his word, because both of us have some bold outlooks on our power ranking. We're very, we're very passionate about where we have these teams ranked, and we're willing to come on air and defend that. And so, you know what? We'll play a little volleyball. I'll go first. We'll start at the bottom. And I think, like you say, we're very similar, but I've got the Cherokee Warriors at number 6. I thought it was a valiant effort. I need to see a little bit more of them out of the special teams, and who knows where they might end up this week, especially if they can pull a big win at home against Sequoyah. But the future is bright for Cherokee, but right now I have them number 6.
Yeah, I'm going to make a little switcheroo on you, just because after thinking about it and reading it here, it doesn't feel right. I'm going to put Creekview at number 6 right now.
Mm-hmm.
The limited passing game bothers me slightly. Hopefully they solve that against North Forsyth, and I'll come on here next week and tell you how wrong I was.
Limited passing game with the quarterback going 100% pass completion.
For
I know what you're getting.
yards.
I know what you're getting at. In terms of yardage. Creekview's my number 5 team, Coop. I think you're right. I think they're going to have to do a little bit more in the passing game down the stretch. I also think that's a tough opponent they faced last week. So I think they get a little bit of a handicap there. No disrespect to River Ridge defeating Cherokee, but I like Creekview at number 5. And I'm going to defer to you here.
Yeah, I got Cherokee at number 5. Reason for Cherokee at 5 is because I feel like that they performed pretty well against River Ridge. Obviously, if ifs and buts were candies and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas. But if you took out the special teams play, they'd be very competitive against River Ridge. Flat score that might have won. So that's why I have them just a step higher than Creekview. That's all I can say about it right now. TBD. Right. I like where they're at, though.
Coop, you're up at number 4.
Yeah, here's where we get a little spicy. I got Etowah at number 4. And before anybody goes yelling at me, here's how I view this, because this has been the debate for us all week since Friday night when I asked the question where everybody had their power rankings. Look, I view the ranking as, if they lined up on Friday, who would you pick to win? And if you just told me right now, would I pick Sequoyah, River Ridge, Woodstock, whatever order you want to put them in, if they lined up and played again, who would I pick? I would pick the 3 teams that are above them against Etowah. Doesn't mean they're not a better team. I just want to see the body of work expand. I want to see more. So if they go into Sprayberry and have a real competitive game, I'm cool with that. I'll bump them up. But as of right now, one game where it was at home, a rivalry game, first game for your new head coach, not a lot of film, I just couldn't do it. So I'm going to keep Etowah jumps a couple spots for me, but they're going to stay at number 4 for now, and knowing that they have a lot of upward mobility potential.
And you're standing by that. That's what I love.
I am.
Coop.
Here it is.
That's what you brought up earlier in the weekend, and that's where you stand. I definitely do not agree. I think we have a head-to-head result that's going to be reflected in my in my analysis here. At number 4 for me, I've got the River Ridge Knights, Coop. I thought they did well by getting a victory, a little bit of cause for concern for me was they needed those 2 special teams touchdowns. I guess in the same breath, we kind of expected them to use special teams, maybe not to get a touchdown, but to really set their offense up. But they use that to their advantage. Nope, it's not a beauty contest. It's a win-loss contest, and River Ridge did get the win. Coop, I've got them at number 4 this week with their victory over Cherokee.
Can't argue with that.
All right.
I could, but
yeah, you
I won't.
can, and you will. Number three for me is the Woodstock Wolverines. Head to head, they lost to the Etowah Eagles. I think that's enough evidence to me at this point in the season to really shake up my power rankings. I believe Woodstock will bounce back. I don't disagree with what you said. If they line up this week, maybe Woodstock would beat Etowah, but this is what I do know. When they did have to line up to play, Etowah did beat Woodstock. And that is the reason why I had to drop Woodstock in my power rankings. I got them at number 3 this week.
I also have Woodstock at number 3 for different reasons. Again, I think that you have to be careful. We've been talking all podcast about not jumping off, the bridge, or not, running and celebrating your first win. I feel like that's the same. Woodstock does drop a spot in my power ranking. They were at number 2 last week. They will be at number 3 this week. It's not that I turn a blind eye to the on-field happenings or results, but I understand the emotion and the different things that went on in the game. So again, that's why I have Woodstock at number 3.
All right. Now, with Woodstock at number 3, only 2 teams left, Coop, let us know what you think about number 2 this week.
Yeah, I got River Ridge at number 2. Reason for that is because, again, in the same breath that we can say special teams, and we kind of view it as like this, secondary thing to your offense and defense, but it's still one of the key factors of football. The old legend Larry Prather used to say there's 4 phases of football: offense, defense, special teams, and emotion. So, but special teams is right there. So I'm not gonna dock them for that. It's a tentative 2. Really, 2 to 4 is very tight for me. One could even say within an overtime game of each other. But I don't feel like you can punish River Ridge for winning a game, however they did it. So with that being said, I am going to give River Ridge, my benefit of the doubt, put them at number 2, understanding that they have a lot to, work on and kind of gel with that group. Also a big reason they're at number 2 for me is Micah Pugh's super impressive. We saw them do it without Camden Cox. I think they're going to continue to improve as Coach Collins has done year over year. And, we've seen this time and time again. So I'm riding with the Knights at number 2.
All right, Coop. Well, I am jumping on the bandwagon. Last week it was in Teter we trust. This week it's in Vavra we trust. Etowah all the way up to number 2 in my poll with a huge overtime victory over their neighborhood rivals, Woodstock. I think this is a team that has an experienced quarterback that proved the moment wasn't too big. I do understand about the rivalry game and all the other factors. At the end of the day, for me, Etowah won the game on the field. They don't have to play them again as of August 19th, 20th, 21st here in the season. They are my number 2 team. It might not look like that way later on, but as of this week, that win was impressive enough for me to jump them from number 6 to number 2 in the most dramatic movement ever in Art Mosley's Cherokee County power ranking or rating, or however you want to describe this here.
Yeah, big jump. But that means our number 1
is, as we've said now for, I think we need to go back to count how many weeks and counting here, but it's got to be pushing like 39, 40 weeks here at the,
yes.
If we only take our high school football weeks at the top of the poll, the Sequoyah Chiefs. Again, with a victory, it wasn't pretty. There are no style points. Coach Teter talked about it. They've got to get back to their basics and stop kind of, drinking the Kool-Aid, the rat poison, or whatever. But maybe it's too much of the North Georgia Sports Report podcast that those players are listening to. Could be because we've been lauding them and singing their praises for week in and week out. But again, Sequoyah, another regular season victory over Denmark. They're still the class of the county. they'll be tested in county this week, so we'll certainly have maybe some apples to apples to compare after this week, Coop.
Yeah, Sequoyah stays at number one for me as well. It's kind of like until they lose a game, I don't know how you drop them out of there. And that's all I have to say. I mean, to your point, we've been, it's got to be like 30, 40 weeks of them being at number one, but they don't lose. And when they do lose, it's to teams that everyone else loses to, like Sprayberry last year. So I don't know what kind of penalty you want us to give them for beating a team. Again, I don't know what kind of penalty I can give a team for finding a way to win. And I'm not going to do that. So Sequoyah will stay at number one for me. And I think that they'll be greatly more, I don't even say improved because they don't need to improve, but maybe more motivated than they were last week, or more prepared for what is to be expected for the rest of the season.
All right. Well, there are our Cherokee County Power Poll. And again, we'll try to get Dave Garner on here later this season to talk a little shop about Cherokee County football and his top 10. Coop, before we sign off, last week was the first week, and I know you're hyper focused on Cherokee County. As you kind of look around the state of Georgia, any surprises last week in the state in terms of results for you as we got kicked off last week?
Yeah, a couple come to mind. Gilmer stomping Fannin. How about that?
Mm-hmm.
We talked about Paul Standard up there at Gilmer, kind of a quiet hire, was somebody that came from St. Pius and, won some state titles down there, ran the wing tee, very just kind of slow, methodical. And when he came to Gilmer, it was very quiet. They didn't jump a ton, which we thought they might. They didn't, but beating Fannin the way they did, they may be a heck of a team this year. And then I think from a, kind of a national perspective, since the game was on ESPN2, Buford and Milton, Buford obviously beating Milton there, I think was a bit of a surprise. We knew that Milton was going to be losing a lot from last season, obviously trying to hit that transfer portal as those city schools do, hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, to make up for some of those losses. But I was surprised that neither quarterback looks super impressive to me, is what I would say. So I don't know what that means moving forward. I don't expect Milton will end up being a bad team. Obviously Buford won the game. I think Buford and Milton are kind of those teams that you circle every year along with your, Valdostas, Lowndes counties, bring it more North Cobb, North Gwinnett, Archer, Grayson is obviously, ranked very highly in the national rankings right now. All that being said, I feel like that for everything else, watching the Corky Kell games, they were pretty standard. I didn't see a ton of upsets there. And even the Georgia High School Football Daily email, I saw it this morning and it kind of surprised me that I think there are only like 15 or 20 upsets. Like when you look at the computer rankings for the entire state. Now, what do computer rankings tell you week 0? Probably nothing. But it's just across the board. I didn't see a ton of upsets, but that would be my takeaway was Gilmer looking really good. And then, Pickens also looks pretty good in their win over Pepperell, over in Rome. But yeah, I would say Buford and Milton from a, statewide national perspective, that was the game that I think a lot of people had their eyes on and maybe a little bit of a letdown from the offensive output.
Yeah, two ways to look at that, Coop. Either a letdown from the offense or two really good defenses making plays, and that probably a little bit of both. In that you got a couple of highly rated quarterbacks, certainly Raiola for Buford, and then Milton with the quarterback transfer. So I thought the defenses really shined in that ball game for a national game. Like you mentioned, you probably maybe want to see a little more from the offenses. Buford will travel down to Savannah to take on Benedictine, a Class 4A power who lost to Colquitt last week by 3 points. So that game Buford won last year 29-28. So it should be an exciting game. And if I can bring up one surprise, I was really super impressed by Casey Barner at McEachern. I thought he really stole the show. It ought to be a fantastic matchup. McEachern will be at home this week taking on North Cobb. North Cobb with Teddy Gerard moving over from North Cobb Christian, and also Zach Bailu. I'm sure our good friend Coach Josh Shaw will correct me on that pronunciation of the last name, but he's just a sophomore, dynamic running back, led the team in rushing a season ago. So it'll be interesting to see that matchup. A lot of stars across the board on that game. So maybe kind of like the official, unofficial Cobb County championship game as North Cobb travels over to McEachern. So a lot of good high school football in Cherokee County, a lot of good football around the area. Again, stacked games this week. Go get out and see one on Friday night. The weather hopefully will be a little bit cooler this week across the state than it was last week. Coop, I feel like we've got an influx of that Texas heat you're sending our way, so we can make sure you can make sure we're not forgetting you. But it's definitely been a scorcher. But get there early. Again, we'll be live at Cherokee. Coop will also be updating social media if you're not able to tune in on the radio. And we're looking forward to it. It ought to be a fantastic night over at Tommy Baker Field. It's been a fantastic night tonight, Coop. Again, thanks to Coach Holley, thanks to Coach Teter, thanks to Coach Budde for making our podcast what it is. We do appreciate their input. And Coop, as you said, if you're a fan of another school and you want to hear, your coordinator or somebody else, let your coach know. Let us know. We'll be happy to get them on the podcast. We love making this a robust feature and ultimately highlighting our players in Cherokee County. We thank you for joining us as always.
Absolutely, brother. Absolutely. Looking forward to it on Friday. Looking forward to hearing you guys on the call and looking forward to seeing another great iteration of the Sequoyah Cherokee rivalry that has always been a dandy. So should be another good one. So thank you all so much for being with us tonight. So long, everyone. We'll see you next week.